so careful to wear gloves. He didn't want to leave any fingerprints behind. What many perpetrators do not realize is they are leaving their fingerprints inside the glove.
Is that they're actually depositing their own prints right inside the latex. Her bag hadn't moved. Her cell sat right where she'd left it. Her heart pills were still sitting on the counter. Keys, the old sneakers she walked in, everything was there. But she wasn't dragged out in her sleepwear, in the dead of night, snatched from that quiet house in the Catalina foothills outside Tucson. As January 31st bled into February 1st, something dark took hold. An 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie vanished into the shadows of that night. When the relatives pulled up the next morning, they walked into a total nightmare. The back doors were standing wide open. There was fresh blood staining the front step. The doorbell cam had been ripped right out of the siding. And then there was that phone, just sitting there in a house that her daughter Savannah later told the whole nation felt like it made no sense. That device remains a jagged, unanswered piece of the puzzle. An online sleuth posted a question in the early hours of the morning. At 1:02 a.m. on March 31st, a post that's been stared at by nearly 6,000 pairs of eyes, asking something the cops won't touch. Law enforcement hasn't said a word about it to the public. Whose sweat and oil are baked onto that screen? If you've been tracking this horror, you're already familiar with the wreckage Nancy's family walked into when they went to check on her that morning of February 1st. But knowing the facts ain't the same as feeling the heavy weight of the forensics. We need to look at this scene again very carefully. Not just as a story, but as a cold, hard inventory of what was left behind. Every object in that house is a scream for help. Every surface holds a secret. Every misplaced item is a potential data point. Each piece of debris either backs up the truth, proves a lie, or just sits there in the quiet, waiting for someone to finally scream the right question loud enough to be heard. Nancy Guthrie was last spotted on the night of January 31st when her son-in-law, Tommaso Cian, dropped her off at her home in the foothills. It was about 9:50 p.m. As far as the official records go, he's the last person confirmed to have seen her alive and safe. She never logged on the next morning for that online church service she'd promised to watch with a friend. She just wasn't there. Alarm bells went off for the family. Her sister, Annie, and Tommaso rushed over and found those back doors standing open to the cold night air. For a brief second, they hoped maybe an ambulance had come. Maybe she just had a medical scare and the medics took her out that way. It was the only way they could process the scene, until they looked down and saw the red stains drying on the front porch. Savannah talked about that gut punch moment in her first televised interview. Seeing that blood on the doorstep changed everything in an instant. The doors swung wide, the camera ripped from its housing, and then they looked inside that silent, empty house. Those propped open doors just didn't sit right. It felt wrong, like the house was gasping for breath while something watched from the dark. We tried to picture a stretcher, a rescue, but her phone was still on the table, and she never went anywhere without that lifeline. The place was spotless. No broken glass, no furniture, tossed just a perfect home where everything was in its place, except for Nancy. Her mobile, her handbag, her keys all left behind. Even the heart pills and blood pressure meds she couldn't live a single day without. She needed those drugs to stay alive. Her shoes were by the door, and she was just gone, snatched while wearing her pajamas. Just sit with that image for a second. It matters for everything that comes next. Nobody walks out on their own life like that. You don't plan an exit and leave your life-saving meds and your only shoes behind. When you're taken, you don't get a choice. You go as you are. We know for a fact her phone stayed behind. In 2026, a cell isn't just a gadget. It's a digital ghost of your soul. It tracks your every move, records your heartbeat, and archives every word you've ever sent or received. It knows your bank balance, your friends, and your daily routine. When that device stays behind while the owner vanishes, it's a bad sign. Investigators have to start asking some hard questions about why. Now that the feds have their hands on it, the pressure is on. They're scrubbing it for what's inside and, more importantly, what was done to it before they arrived. This is the heart of the matter. Who had their hands on that phone before the blue lights showed up? Nancy's Apple Watch was there too, sitting silent in the house. The forensic value here goes way beyond simple health tracking. It's much more intimate and much more revealing than the news suggests. See, Nancy had a pacemaker, and that watch was talking to her heart every single second she was alive. The sheriff says that doorbell camera went dark at precisely 1:47 in the morning on February 1st. 41 minutes later, at 2:28 a.m., the connection between her heart and her phone just died. That 41-minute gap from the camera being killed to her heart monitor going silent is the window of her abduction. The watch stayed, the phone stayed, but that pacemaker went wherever she was being dragged into the night. At 2:28 a.m., the signal went cold. Then there's the matter of the hearing aids, a detail most people have overlooked. There's a specific bit of evidence here that hasn't been handled clearly. One set was found in the house, but there's a rumor. Word is she had a backup pair. If she was wearing those when they took her, she might have heard the very last thing he whispered. When they snatched her, those hearing aids weren't just medical tools, they were digital beacons. See, modern tech pairs via Bluetooth to a smartphone, logging every movement on the device. That phone never left the house, but if Nancy had a second set on her when they dragged her off, the digital crumbs from those devices, if we can grab them, turn into a smoking gun. The pair left behind is just a cold forensic surface now, a physical relic that might still hold a killer's oily prints. The Pima County Sheriff's boys confirmed the FBI stepped in and took control of the hard evidence from Nancy Guthrie's place. That part's out in the open. What they ain't telling the public is the actual list of what they grabbed, what the lab techs found, what the results screamed, or who they cleared. The genetic samples in? This nightmare went to DNA Labs International, way down in Florida. Biology don't lie, but it's stubborn. You gotta have the raw material and enough matching markers to call it a hit. Every little bit counts when a life is gone. Right at the start, things got ugly between the local cops and the feds over who got to touch the evidence. Sheriff Nanos wasn't hiding his frustration. He wanted everything under one roof. Day one, it went to our guys. Then, 10 days later, we're still at it. They find gloves. The feds ask if they should go to the bureau lab. We told them no, keep it all in our house. Why split the deck? Those power plays matter when you're staring at the clock waiting for a name. Here's the truth about that DNA. The Pima County Sheriff's Department went on the record February 13th, saying fresh samples from Nancy's home were in the pipe, and that the sweat and skin didn't belong to Nancy or anyone she knew. That's the official story, but the reality of that genetic soup is a hell of a lot darker than a press release. The traces found at the crime scene are what the whitecoats call a mixed and partial sample. It's a jumble of genetic code from more than one soul, which makes pulling out a single clean killer's profile feel damn near impossible. Sometimes the evidence is just a mess. We got DNA from that house that's a tangled web of people. We gotta strip it apart. I'm praying the lab can find the thread. It sure didn't hit in CODIS, the FBI's big national database. Now, the detectives say they're turning to genetic genealogy, a slow grind that builds family trees from public ancestry sites to hunt down a faceless donor. C.C. Moore, a pro who's nailed over 300 monsters in cold cases, says it's straight. A mixed sample is a total nightmare to decode. Figuring out whose blood or skin this is could take a whole year. So, it's a much nastier puzzle than anyone wanted to admit. This is where it gets heavy. If there's a crowd of ghosts in that mixture, 2 or 3 different people, it all comes down to the math. Here's what we know for sure. There is biological filth in that house that ain't Nancy Guthrie's and didn't belong to any guest. It hasn't been pinned on a name yet. It's too messy for a quick computer match in the national system. The cops think it's the guy, but they're just guessing in the dark. And that nameless biological stain sits right next to the footage of a masked man with a gun at Nancy's door on the morning of February 1st. That's the same clip FBI Director Kash Patel put out on Plaint, February 10th. It showed a predator with a sidearm and a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiking bag. They pulled that video from the digital shadows even though the camera was ripped off the wall. The DNA and the grainy video prove one thing you can't argue. Someone was in that house who had no business being there. Someone mapped this out. Someone showed up with gear, with a plan, and with blood on their mind. They left a bit of themselves in a shadow, but no ID. That's why those tiny traces on a phone or a hearing aid ain't just some technical detail. It's the central question of this entire nightmare. At 10:02 in the morning on March 31st, a digital sleuth going by Hotwire 405 posted a question about Nancy's disappearance. By the time we saw it, that post had nearly 6,000 eyes on it. Not just random clicks, but people watching a single question in the dead of night. It was short. No wild theories. No finger pointing. Just a hard question about the science, and it's time we answered it. You gotta wonder if anyone actually dusted Nancy's phone or whose prints were left behind in the mess. That question kicked the whole thing off, and the cold logic behind it is why it spread so fast. See, once you start hunting for whose prints are on that glass, you're forced to look at the flip side. What if there ain't a single print found? A phone a person uses every single day. It's gonna be caked in oils and prints. Not figuratively, we're talking literal biological evidence. Skin oils hit glass. And they stick to the metal every time you touch them. Every single swipe, every little press. Every time you grab it, shove it in your pocket, or set it on a table, you're leaving a mark. You're leaving layers of them, stacked one on top of the other. Use a phone for weeks, and one person's prints are going to be on basically every square inch of that device. Nancy Guthrie's phone wasn't just rotting in some drawer. She was talking to people, living her life. That phone was in her hand. It was sitting right there on her nightstand while she slept. Any tech worth their salt processing a daily use smartphone is going to find something. The only way a tech finds zero prints on a used phone is if someone wiped it clean after she died. Now, there's a real heavy distinction we gotta make here. That Hotwire 405 post didn't say it was wiped. It just asked what the lab found. We don't know for sure if it was wiped. It ain't been confirmed yet. Neither this show nor anyone else can claim that as a hard fact. But we can look at the math. If the prints are all Nancy's, then everything's normal. That's just a life lived. But if there's someone else's prints mixed in, well, that's a whole different nightmare. And if the phone is just empty, if it's sterile, that's the kind of silence that screams. Same thing goes for her hearing aids and any surface that shadow in the footage touched. 6,000 people latched onto that post because the logic was sharp, cold, and followed the trail. You gotta understand how the tech works to realize just how much those results actually matter. This ain't some Hollywood magic where they just blow dust around. Real forensics is a messy business. Technicians use aluminum powder or heavy chemical reagents to pull those hidden marks out of the dark. A glass screen is actually a perfect surface for catching a killer's mistake. Glass holds on to oils. The problem is how people hold their phones all different ways. Everyone's got a different grip, so what you usually get is a mess of overlapping, smeared ridges. The lab guys work with the scraps they've got. If the screen is a mess, they check the frame. Different materials give up different secrets. They can pull tiny details off the edges and buttons, even if the screen is a lost cause. People always grip the charging port and those side buttons. An examiner takes photos of everything first, then hits each material with the right chemicals before lifting the prints. They scan them in and run them through the system to see who they belong to. They push those prints through the National Identification System, hoping for a name to pop up. If it's just the victim, it's noted. If it's a match in the system, the sirens start blaring. If it's a stranger who ain't in the system, they save it. They wait for a reason to use it. But if they find nothing, absolutely nothing usable on any surface, there's only two ways that happens. Either someone took a cloth and scrubbed away every trace of Nancy's life, or whoever touched it never took their gloves off. Either way, the result is a void. A phone with no prints at all? That's not just weird. It's a neon sign for foul play. It demands an answer. It's not what's supposed to happen, and no real pro is going to call that a fluke. Now, look at what this investigation is already staring at. You got footage of a man with a gun at the door, and then the camera itself just vanishes. The back doors were propped open with her own flower pots. That's cold. That's methodical. This wasn't some guy making it up as he went. This was someone who had the whole thing mapped out. Every surface they touched makes that phone more than just a forensic puzzle. It's a window into a killer's behavior. Let's follow the logic of a wiped phone. It ain't a fact yet, but we gotta look at this hypothetical. Every investigator has to think this through because it's the most haunting of all the possible scenarios we're facing. Imagine Nancy's phone was scrubbed clean between her last use and when the family arrived on that 1st of February. Someone did that. Nancy didn't. She wasn't there. Wiping a phone of every print ain't something that happens by accident. That ain't a passive event. It takes real physical action, a rag, some cleaning supplies, or a focused manual effort. This effort strips skin oil from every surface. Why would a killer wipe a phone they're just gonna leave behind? The answer ain't complicated. You wipe a phone to hide that you touched it, not to hide what you used. Clearing digital data takes a different path. You're talking factory resets, killing encryption keys, or a remote wipe of everything. Those commands kill the digital contents. But scrubbing the outside? That's about erasing the biometric record of who held it. Whoever scrubbed the exterior but left the data either panicked or they just cared more about hiding their own physical prints. They chose one type of evidence to kill over another, or maybe that digital life was gone before the scrubbing. A total wipe exterior and digital is a cold, multi-step process. That's a monster who isn't reacting, they're calculating their moves. Here is what makes this so precise. Wiping down the outside of a phone doesn't guarantee you've left no trace. Microscopic skin ridges can survive in the charging ports and the gaps around buttons. Black lights see what we can't see. Forensic tech can sometimes pull a ghost of a print off glass even after a killer thinks they scrubbed it. If the lab found a surgically clean phone with zero residue, that silence is a finding that tells a story. That absence of evidence is a lead itself. Now, connect this to what the investigators confirmed about the crime scene. The suspect on that doorbell camera was prepared. He was armed. He had a pack. He killed the camera feed. He used flower pots to prop those back doors open. This is a person who was thinking ahead about this. A man who plans for cameras and door access also plans for what he touches and what he's going to leave behind. A post on Hotwire 405 asked the same fingerprint question about Nancy's hearing aids with careful framing. This is because the hearing aid situation is messier than it looks. They found one pair of Nancy's aids there. They were at the home. That's confirmed. But reporting says Nancy might have had more than just that one pair. If she was wearing a second pair when they took her, those devices are a different kind of forensic evidence. They would be with her. A digital forensics expert on Crime Stories with Nancy Grace explained how this all works. He said modern hearing aids pair via Bluetooth to a phone. They show up as connected devices on the phone. If the phone stayed behind, it might still log the last time those hearing aids were connected to the device. The phone might log the time and a rough location for that moment. That would be digital data for investigators. That data comes from the phone, not the aids. But the pair left at the house is a different story. That pair is the key to the fingerprints. These are tiny devices handled by the person wearing them every day. They are put in, taken out, and cleaned. They are intimate devices that sit right on or in the ears. You'd expect Nancy's prints and no one else's. If someone other than Nancy ever touched those, it's a lead. Any partial print or ridge detail that ain't hers is massive evidence. It's the signature of the one who took her. Pulling a hearing aid out of someone's ear takes an invasive, manual action that you don't do by accident. It ain't incidental. If there are strangers' prints on those, it tells us exactly how close that predator really got. It shows what they did, and if those aids show no prints at all, the same dark cleaning logic applies. These devices are covered in the owner's oil as a baseline. A clean device ain't the default, it's a warning. Now take this fingerprint puzzle and put it in the full evidence picture. The scene is getting much more detailed. It's more detailed than the story we were told 2 months ago. These facts changed the entire framework of the case. The forensic picture changed. Blood on the porch and driveway was confirmed to be Nancy's DNA through a formal test. That blood means she was injured as she was forced off her property. Savannah came out and confirmed it directly. There was blood on the doorstep, a detail no family member wants to be the one to say out loud. Every detail matters when you're building back the events that happened on that cold and dark night. A masked, armed man was on camera right before the silence started. Security feed catches the dead silence of those early hours on February 1st. The camera was killed at 1:47 a.m. and ripped right off the siding. The feds dug up the footage from residual data on the back end. The system had already saved a few haunting frames before the lens was blinded. It shows a man in a mask, pistol on his hip, standing right on Nancy's doorstep. 41 minutes after the feed went black at 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker sent its final pulse through her phone, then flatlined. The house inside was spotless. A source close to the case told News Nation that those rooms were in pristine condition. There wasn't a struggle inside. All that blood was found on the porch, which tells the cops that whatever went wrong, it happened as she was leaving, not in the living room. The DNA they found inside, just scraps, and partial bits that don't belong to Nancy or her inner circle, is being run through forensic genealogy since the usual labs didn't hit a match. That doorbell camera footage is real, but it hasn't given them a face yet. Those 2 times, 1:47 and 2:28, leave a 41-minute gap where she was taken. Into this picture, we gotta add the phone. Nancy's cell was still in that house. The intruder who showed up that night, the one who tore down the camera and propped the doors with flower pots, was armed and hunting. If his DNA is in the house, he likely handled that phone. He might have touched it. He might have not. But whether there are strange prints on that glass or they're conspicuously absent, nobody's talking yet. Seeing how surgical this hit was, the answer to that question carries a lot of weight. This wasn't some random snatch. It was a calculated act, and the silence from the investigators is starting to feel heavy. We gotta be real about one thing. The FBI knows way more than we do. That ain't a dig at the local cops. It's just how federal cases work. The agents on this thing have the full forensic files and the data from Nancy's phone. They've got the fingerprint hits, the pacemaker logs, the money trails, and every word from the witnesses. They've read every single word from every witness they've brought in. They aren't working in the dark like we are. We only have what they choose to disclose. That space between their secrets and our knowledge is where the truth lives. It's entirely possible the FBI has already figured out the fingerprint situation. They might know exactly who touched that device. They might have matched a print and tucked it into an active file that they can't talk about yet. They won't risk a future trial by talking too soon. In that scenario, the silence makes sense, even if it's hard. But what if the phone only had Nancy's prints on it? That's the boring expected outcome no one reports on. A result that doesn't change anything, doesn't get a press conference. But there's a third way this goes. The phone was wiped clean or had prints that don't match anyone in the system. That result is just sitting in a federal file because no one with enough power has demanded an answer on the record yet. A sleuth online, Hotwire 405, asked the question at 10:02 in the morning. Thousands saw it, but a post on a screen doesn't force a detective to talk. A formal records request might do it. A push from Congress might. A massive media blitz might. But right now, the question is just hanging there. It's been raised, but nobody's answering. Now, let's talk about how someone scrubs a crime scene. It's directly relevant. If that phone is clean, it fits a very dark profile. The person who hit Nancy's home that night was a predator. They reached up and tore that camera right off the wall to destroy the evidence before it started. They cut the feed before the lens could see them. They used Nancy's own flower pots to keep the doors open. They didn't bring tools. They used her own home against her. They'd been there before, or they lingered. The house inside was perfect. No signs of a fight, no furniture knocked over. It was eerily quiet in there. The blood was all outside on the porch floor. This isn't the work of some panicked amateur who lost control. This was someone who planned every move and thought about the forensics before they even stepped onto the property. Someone that careful doesn't just forget about fingerprints. They don't leave a trace on a cell phone by accident. They either didn't touch it, wore tactical gloves, or they wiped it down till it shone. They were always ahead. Seeing that masked man with a gun on camera, someone who went through the effort of hiding their whole identity. He didn't just stumble onto Nancy's porch. He arrived with a mission and the gear to finish it. Every detail points to a killer who knows how to stay invisible in a world full of surveillance. He wiped it clean. That masked ghost on the feed took the time to suit up in a full disguise. Wearing a full face mask before hitting the property shows they were already sweating being identified. A person in a ski mask at a crime scene is worried about cameras. If they're worried about cameras, they're worried about leaving behind forensic clues. Someone terrified of forensic clues is real careful about what they touch. Now, a half-assed cleanup actually tells investigators a lot. If they wipe the phone down but left their DNA elsewhere in that house, it shows the cops what that person prioritized. Did they use that phone in a way that had pinned the crime on them? Did they get in there to see something or scrub something, then wipe the glass to hide the grease from their hands? These are the breadcrumbs that investigators use to build a timeline. Savannah Guthrie's been carrying this burden out in the open like few people ever could. She took a break from today. She sat down for one interview with Hoda Kotb. It was careful, sharp, and just plain gut-wrenching. She laid out the hard facts. The blood, those doors, the camera. She said the family thinks 2 of those ransom notes were the real deal. It's incredible and we're a unit. I've talked about how brilliant my brother is, but my sister is just as brilliant. She confirmed her mom was hurting bad, couldn't move well, and there just ain't no world. Where Nancy just walked off on her own. That kind of detail from someone so close is a heavy data point. Maybe someone wanders off, but she can't. My mom, her back, she was in so much pain. It was bad. You know, on a good day, she might make it to the mailbox to grab the mail. Savannah Guthrie's got resources, lawyers, and cops on speed dial. If that fingerprint question had an answer that was safe to put out there, you can bet she would have said something by now. The fact she hasn't, and the cops haven't either, likely points to how the feds do business. Families get told exactly what they can and can't say when blabbing might ruin an ongoing prosecution. Strategic silence from the feds has its own cold logic. But it's got a limit. Eventually, through an indictment, an arrest, or when it's all over, the truth on Nancy's personal stuff will be public. Whatever those results show is going to hit hard. The reason those fingerprints matter so much to everyone watching this mess is partly because of what other big cases taught us about evidence on a victim's things. In the Lotsie Peterson case, the forensics, including what was and wasn't found on that boat, Scott Peterson said he was fishing on the day Lacey vanished became the heart of the case. The sweep of that boat and what the stains and clean spots suggested about how it was used helped put a man away. Then there's Gabby Petito, where location pings from her and Brian Laundrie's phones mapped out the timeline and caught him in a lie. Phone data, digital and physical, was the thread that pulled it together. This isn't saying the Guthrie case is the same. It's about the method. In big cases where evidence is left behind, the forensic breakdown of every surface and every item is the foundation for a conviction or a total collapse. A phone ain't just a phone. In the architecture of a kidnapping, the phone left at the scene might be the most important piece of the whole puzzle. The question of whose prints are on Nancy Guthrie's phone is the kind of thing a grand jury hears in the dark. It's the kind of thing defense lawyers hunt for in discovery, and it's the kind of thing that, once answered, either confirms the hunt or forces everyone to look at the shadows again. The fact they haven't answered it just means the investigation is guarding it, not that it ain't there. Let's look at the whole picture, not with a conclusion, because we ain't there yet, but with a frame, because the frame is what matters now, and it's what you need to hold on to as this nightmare keeps unfolding. Nancy Guthrie was last seen on the night of January 31st, 2026 at her Catalina Foothills home north of Tucson. It was 1:47 in the morning on February 1st when that doorbell camera just cut to black. Exactly 41 minutes later, at 2:28 a.m., Nancy's own pacemaker sent out its very last signal. By 11 that morning, her family pulled up only to find the back doors standing wide open, inviting the cold in. There was blood on the front step, the camera was ripped off the wall, and Nancy, she was just gone. She was in her pajamas, no shoes, no meds, and the FBI moved in to bag whatever evidence was left. The PCSD finally went public, confirming they found biological material that didn't belong to Nancy or anyone she knew. We're talking about a messy, partial sample they're trying to track through the lens of forensic genealogy. You can't run it through the usual databases, so that masked man with the gun remains a nameless shadow. No arrests yet, even with $1 million reward on the table while the investigation just grinds on. The FBI has had Nancy's phone since the start, and checking a smartphone for prints is basic detective work. In a case this heavy, if those results even exist, the authorities ain't saying a word to the public. One social media investigator asked that exact question at 1:02 in the morning, and it hit hard. 6,000 people saw it and felt the weight of it specifically, what it means if there's nothing there. See, if a phone that gets used every single day is suddenly clean, forensics has a very grim answer. Any expert will tell you a phone used by a living person is going to be covered in their prints. A phone with no prints was wiped, and you don't just accidentally scrub away a person's entire physical existence. This ain't an accident, and you gotta ask the same thing about the hearing aids left at the house. The same logic applies to every single surface that armed, masked predator might have touched in the dark. You take the DNA, the footage, and that blood on the porch, and a forensic picture starts to form. That picture is way more detailed than they're letting on, and the fingerprint mystery is sitting right inside it. Eventually, in a courtroom or a press briefing, the answer is going to become part of the public record. And when it does, every other piece of this nightmare is going to be understood in relation to it. The online community tracking this case has actually stayed disciplined, which is a rare thing these days. The posts that actually go viral and stick around aren't the ones just screaming accusations at the sky. They're the ones asking surgical, logical questions like that Hotwire Force 55 post that cut through the noise. No names, no wild theories, just a forensic question about the evidence that nobody is answering yet. 6,000 views happen because the question was right, and that kind of restraint carries real weight. In a federal hunt like this, the integrity of these online groups can actually have some major consequences. Pointing at the wrong names just creates static, and it can mess with a witness's head for good. Potential jurors see things that won't ever make it to trial, and that kind of speculation does real damage. This community mostly dodged that trap, keeping their focus on the questions that actually matter. They're asking them the right way, pointing right at the forensic gaps that the police haven't filled. The law should be able to explain these holes, but so far, they haven't said a damn thing. That pressure is vital. It keeps Nancy's case alive and keeps the media's eyes locked on the truth. It keeps the regular folks demanding real answers from the agencies that are supposed to be running this. With Sheriff Chris Nanos' handling of this already under a microscope, accountability is the only thing that matters. There's a recall effort starting, so public heat ain't just noise, it's the only check on their power. That fingerprint question is part of the cage, surgical and aimed directly at the evidence they're holding. It asks what forensics actually found, which is exactly what a journalist or a congressman would ask. Prosecutors usually answer this stuff in opening statements, but Nancy Guthrie is still out there, somewhere. Since January 31st, her family has been trapped in a stretch of time they're never getting back. No press talk can fix that, and no reward money matters unless it finally brings her home. The forensic proof from her house is in federal hands now, and it's heavy with the truth. Her family and tens of thousands of people watching this case are just waiting for the silence to break. The fingerprints, the masked man, the timing, and that DNA. They're all just weight on an unmoving scale. Forensic genealogy is one path, but that Apple Watch in the home tells another. It's synced to a pacemaker that just went silent, cold. In the dead hours of February 1st, another piece drops. Every item left behind is a witness, and those witnesses eventually talk. They always do. The masked suspect thought he was hidden, but the timeline we've tracked doesn't lie. He's out there right now, somewhere in the dark. The evidence board, the FBI task force, the DNA questions, insider knowledge, and a profile that screams predator, someone knows something. Detectives haven't stopped since day one. They've been stacking facts, brick by brick, trying to make sense of the senseless. It's heavy. We're sticking to the hard facts, forensic logic, and nothing we can't prove beyond a doubt. The truth ain't pretty. What's on that phone matters. We're still asking, still watching the shadows. Someone always breaks.